Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is February 2nd. That makes it Groundhog Day. February 2nd, 2017. I hope that doesn't happen over and over again. Thursday show we're bringing to you this morning, and thumbs up from Justice, who's full of the news references today. He was telling me earlier we had our interlude music on, but Milo was not. No federal, he actually says, no federal funds for that intro. Of course, he meant federal funds, but I kind of like the typo better. That's it. No more federal funds for you. That's the end of it. Levels are 5 by 5, and we did finally learn, thanks to a couple of audience members who were alert to the question and sent me some answers, what 5 by 5 actually means. Levels are 5 by 5, but with sufficient intelligence. And, anybody get a sense of where we might have to go today? All right. Yes. Trump's crazy. He dominates the news. We shouldn't let him, but I don't know what else to do with the guy. And I did see somebody had a great tweet the other day. Not momentous enough, I guess, for putting aside for sharing with you, but I'm going to share the thought of it anyway. I didn't think, I'll base the show on this. But whoever had Australia and Mexico in the World War III pool, congratulations. No one would have predicted it. Let's see. He picked another fight with Mexico. That was I was going to say understandable. That was, I guess, expected. It's not understandable. It's ridiculous. But Australia, you're not supposed to, really even be able to pick a fight with Australia. There's nothing to pick a fight with. I guess he saw that video where the guy punched the kangaroo and he figured, what the hell, I can do this too. So, I think that's the biggest story. God, who can even tell anymore? The long and short of it, he had a series of calls with international heads of state and leaders yesterday, and they included, at least speaking with the president of Mexico and the prime minister of Australia, and he fought with all of them. And it was an interesting feature of the calls, apparently, was that he spent time on each of them bragging about his electoral victory and how big his inaugural crowds were. This guy can't let that go. And this is the biggest story of the day, only because I guess the day went on longer. In addition to pissing off the Australian Prime Minister, and in addition to all, we should review all of the things that got said and done, I guess. I don't know. You likely know them already, but we should comment on them a little bit. I suppose that's a little bit about what makes this show fun, but I don't know. It doesn't sound like I'm having fun, does it? But in addition to doing all of this and pissing off the Australian Prime Minister over a deal, this is where he got mad. We'll take a look at the Washington Post piece in depth, but he got mad that President Obama had committed the United States to a deal with the Australians to accept another 1,250 refugees, Middle Eastern refugees who had initially been taken in by Australia, but have been really warehoused, apparently, in some deplorable conditions on an island offshore of Australia. And I did see somebody make the observation, too, for different reasons, maybe the United States or maybe Australia should think about saying, we are going to actually take these people, and we mistreated them, and we owe them resettlement right here, right now, close to where they are, no more schlepping them around the world. It was a long enough journey, I think, to get to Australia. That's a good point, too. But anyway, I guess Trump was feeling upset because he didn't feel like he needed to honor the obligations of a previous administration. But he made a big stink out of it and yelled at the Australian Prime Minister. And I don't know. So he created hard feelings. I don't know whether the Australian Prime Minister is willing to roll with it or not, but I don't know. It was just annoying to see that he was embarrassing us in front of the world again. And then apparently, I guess according to the in-depth stories about it, the Australian or the U.S. Embassy in Australia reassured the Australian government, yeah, we're going to honor our agreement with you, our commitment to accepting these refugees. And subsequently, I guess, Trump took to Twitter to call that into question one more time. He goes ahead and tweets. The tweet reads, "Do you believe it? The Obama administration agreed to take thousands of illegal immigrants from Australia." Now, just breaking it right, I'll break it off right there. I mean, one, we're talking about refugees, which by definition means they're not illegal immigrants, and they're not illegal immigrants from Australia. And if you didn't know anything about the deal, I mean, if this was the first you heard of it, and it's a likelihood that if you're following Donald Trump closely on Twitter, it is the first you've heard of it. I don't know what, I wonder whether people took that to mean, so we're taking Australians. What's the big deal? But I guess they only read as far as illegal immigrants. I probably didn't even read the Australia part. Anyway, he goes on to say, "Why? I will study this dumb deal!" Exclamation point. Don't bother, dumbass. You're not going to get anywhere. You studying something, I'll save you the time. Anyway, apparently reports out of the White House, and I mean from inside the Oval Office, there's leaks all over the place with this administration. If you thought he was going to be a guy to crack down on leaks because he said he was going to, yeah, you can forget that. That guy, his whole career is leaks. Anyway, apparently people, as they put it in, I think in the Washington Post piece, people's faces are turning white when he's on the phone with international leaders. They can't believe what he's saying to them. And apparently he ends up pretty much hanging up on the Australian Prime Minister after 25 minutes of a 1-hour scheduled call. And again, the leaks out of the White House is, well, geez, it was the end of a long day and he was tired and irritable. Remember the whole stamina thing? He's an old guy. I mean, he is, and he's not particularly healthy. And by the way, his weirdo doctor, for some reason, I don't know what prompted him to talk to the press and tell him, by the way, he's on statins and Propecia, which I don't think it's a dangerous combination or anything like that. You could grow hair on your heart, I suppose. That wouldn't really be very good. But I mean, I don't know. So I thought that was kind of a weird revelation. And like I said, it's the most talked about thing, I think, but who can even tell whether it's the biggest news? There's more. There's a botched military raid that he tried to pull off in Yemen, and now the reports are, yeah, they basically had, A, zero idea of what they were getting into, and B, no serious counsel available to them, and the decision was made with Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon to pull off some kind of SEAL Team 6 raid that ended up getting one of the members of SEAL Team 6 killed, along with 8-year-old girls and who knows how many civilian casualties. And there's still more. We didn't even get to how he spent the first day of Black History Month, which I'm sure we'll get to later. I think that would have been a story for a week if it hadn't been for him botching his right out of the box with a Tehran Rescue 2 move, killing Special Operations Forces. And how does he spend the morning? Not, by the way, thanking him for his service, but angry that Milo Yiannopoulos didn't get a paycheck because Berkeley canceled the speech on him because he's an idiot. Okay, I'm done. Thank you. Now it's your turn, Greg. Make yourself feel better.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm better now.
What's new?
Oh, well, nothing much. It's pretty much all the same.
You know, the one advantage of all of this is that there's so much going on that it actually kind of interferes with what I think would have been a big story, and that is the Milo Yiannopoulos protests in Berkeley. Yeah. Which turned mildly violent. There's always a small number of anarchists that, kind of spoil parties. Yes, and Trump normally, with Bannon, would have jumped on this and said, look, law and order, I'm Richard Nixon, and you need the silent majority to back me from all of these hippies. and you couldn't because there was so much else going on. They never had a chance to really get to that.
That's true. Also, by the way, I will say I think that there's a sufficient buffer built in now from the flurry of the last week or so of people taking to Twitter and openly saying punching Nazis isn't so bad. I mean, I don't know if it's I still don't know whether it's a great policy. Feels good. Might not be a bad idea, honestly, and it might be bearing some policy and political fruit, frankly, that it's not quite so easy to jump in and say, gosh, I need law and order, when half the population is convinced that maybe these guys need a little rough treatment. I don't know. It's a little,
well, you have the other side of it. So let me point to a little tiny tweet storm I put together this morning on the ramifications of chaos in the White House. This is my theme, and I think it's bearing fruit here.
I would say so, given the first 5 minutes of the show. Holy mackerel.
So there's a Bloomberg View piece called Trump Advisors, a Contradiction in Terms, and talking about the fact that Bannon has had something of a coming out over the last few days. It says it was revealed that he worked in secrecy with a White House youngster, 32-year-old Stephen Miller, to draft Trump's immigration order. Widespread outcry about the order and Bannon's apparent power to dictate policy, along with his promotion to the NSC, inspired a spate of recent headlines describing where gravity now resides in the Oval Office with President Bannon. That sounds familiar. That's a headline I've been using for a week. This creates some peril for Bannon, it points out. Trump has always enjoyed having street-smart brawlers like Bannon at his side. Think of Roy Cohen and Roger Stone. But he's unlikely to countenance a pretender to the throne. Even if Bannon is going out of his way not to pretend, the media has crowned him, and Trump absorbs media coverage, and it often sways him. So, Bannon and Conway may survive in the White House for as long as Trump does. But there are already rifts within Trump's senior team as different cliques jockey for position, and Trump's inability to knit together advisors and managers in his family-centric ways will continue to be stumbling blocks for his administration. So I think that that's an important observation. And then I like this, because this will come in handy in terms of what we've been talking about. The practical implications of this for Trump's presidency have just surfaced 12 days in, with the word chaos a common term in many accounts of his immigration ban, his confrontation with the Justice Department, his random tweeting, his fights with U.S. intelligence. Federal agencies are investigating him, allegations of voter fraud. We've seen some problems, Republican Senator Rob Portman told CNN diplomatically. But the point I'm making there is chaos. And so what I said is that, we've talked about Bannon as a chaos agent and Trump as a chaos agent. And there was a very good piece by Ron Fournier, not your favorite, but the reason that I bring it up is it's in Crane's Detroit business. He's now a Detroit resident and is focusing on Michigan, not so much the country. But it's Rise Up Detroit, Trump's executive order on immigration and assault on Michigan's economy, and goes through why the executive order is so terrible for Detroit and other places. And my point here is that it's really important to not just say, gee, it's chaos, but look at the effects of chaos. In other words, if you want to reach Trump voters, another theme of mine for the week, don't shame them. Tell them how the chaos they think that they supported. You sent this guy here to disrupt. What does disruption mean to you locally? You Michigan people who voted for Trump. Michigan barely went Trump over Clinton. What does that mean for you? Now that you voted for chaos, what kind of effect is it going to have locally? And I think that's the approach that we have to take in terms of spelling this out. Otherwise, I think that that's a much better way of reaching the small number of people who might be persuadable as opposed to deplorable. There are deplorables, but they're a smaller number. It doesn't apply to all Trump voters. It does apply to David Duke and his ilk, who are celebrating and gloating about how everything is going wonderfully for them, and the Democrats are in disarray. I think they're just trying to cover up the fact that chaos is there and it's not working the way they thought. So there's another piece on the effect of chaos, if you will, and that is this one on what you mentioned, that Trump approved his first covert op without sufficient intel, without sufficient ground support or adequate backup preparations. Guy gets killed, American kid gets killed, and he's got to deal with it. The press may want to play this as, look at Donald Trump, the patriotic guy who went to visit the family of the guy who was brought back deceased. But this isn't George W. Bush, and you just can't play that for propaganda. The fact of the matter is, he set up the botched mission and caused that death, and that's part of the whole story, and you got to report that.
Yeah.
So, just saying the chaos isn't enough. Again, the other one, John Harwood, a piece here, U.S.-Australia rift is possible after Trump ends call with Prime Minister. You just went over that and how ridiculous that was. And by the way, one of my expat friends from England says, maybe the biggest problem is that Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister of Australia, is head of the Liberal Party, and maybe Trump doesn't understand what that means.
Oh, that could be.
It's as simple as that, because
sure.
he's not exactly an in-depth reader.
Right. Well,
I'm getting on the phone with attitude. The guy's a liberal anyway, and now he's going to tell me I can't do what I want to do, and he's a liberal. I'm losing it right here.
Yeah. Well, I don't doubt it at all. This is the segment of the population that thought National Socialists were leftist. So
National Socialists. Which league
Nazis.
do they play in? I forgot. They're a pretty good team, but
the Nazi League. The kind that's
not baseball?
Was okay to punch. Well, no. Although I'm sure they
Nationals?
might try.
Isn't that the same thing?
No. By the way, this morning is the National Prayer Breakfast, which is a story unto itself, if you ever want to read about the background of the weirdos that founded that bit. But it's now become a bipartisan ritual, I guess. Anyway, he's there. And, of course, they will want to speak about all sorts of things. Apparently, he has kicked off his speech discussing the ratings of The Apprentice. We had tremendous success on The Apprentice. Schwarzenegger's ratings went right down the tubes. That's what they came there to hear.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, he's still doing that. He did that probably with each of the different leaders, talking about how he won the election and how many electoral votes he won.
Right, absolutely.
Right? That's the lead-in.
Grudge holding is the common thread of today's discussion of yesterday's outrages.
Right. So, again, to finish up here, in the past week, this is a tweet from Damian Paletto as part of my chaos thingy here. Mm-hmm. In the past week, Trump has bypassed diplomatic channels and used Twitter to hammer Mexico, Australia, and Iran. And my pro tip for journalists, end of Tweetstorm, don't just cover the chaos and whether Trump supporters like it or dislike it. Cover its ramifications. Context.
What?
Because putting all of that in context is really the important thing. Here's a timepiece on Steve Bannon, second most powerful man in the world, talking about the fact that there's actually some rifts being seen, and Trump is not thrilled with all of this. It says here, yet Bannon's prominence in the first 10 days of the administration and scenes of confusion and disorder that are his disruptive hallmark has rattled the West Wing and perhaps even dismayed the president. According to senior administration officials, Trump hauled in some half dozen of his key advisors for a brisk dressing down. Everything goes through Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, he said. Nothing flows that hasn't been scheduled by his deputy, Katie Walsh. You're going to see a slower, more deliberative process, one official told Time. I'll believe it when I see it because Bannon has walk-in privileges. But the point is not everything worked out the way that they thought. And as Real Clear Politics analyst David Byler tweeted this morning, on Twitter and sometimes in the media, it seems like either Trump is a complete idiot or he's a three-dimensional chess genius, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And the truth is in the middle. He's made a lot of unforced errors. He doesn't know a lot, but the SCOTUS appointment was probably pretty good tactics because it does split the Democrats a little bit in terms of trying to decide whether or not to filibuster.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that does. That doesn't really put him in the middle, in my view, but it is between the two. Yes.
Yeah, maybe more one end than the other. Look,
yes.
Being 3 centimeters away from one of those poles is still in the middle.
Yes, I guess it's a vast middle. We'll say that.
It is a vast middle. There's a lot of room there. If Gorsuch as a choice, is that how you pronounce his name? Because I'm famous for mangling names.
Yeah, well, you and me both.
Gorsuch, whatever. If that was a reasonable choice, just compared to like everything else that he did that's unreasonable on a scale, on a graded scale, then you can guess that it wasn't his decision.
That's entirely likely. The list he was presented with, I'm sure he just said, give me a list. And
yeah. Yeah, narrow it down.
Right.
Mike Pence probably chose this one, I'm thinking.
Look, it's not Judge Judy, so he didn't.
And the thing is that I think that probably happened because this is one of those areas where Trump just doesn't care. He could care less about who it is. What does he care?
Yeah, he'll say.
What's that got to do with the apprentice ratings?
Right, as far as saying, give me someone that'll make me look strong and competent.
Yeah. Give me something that won't get me into trouble and will make me look good and fine, whatever. Just, I don't care.
Meanwhile, this morning we find out that, I guess, Gorsuch's favorite pastime in college was the founding of the Fascism Forever Club. Which
Nice.
I'm sure he meant tongue-in-cheek, but it's, again, a little bit of privilege, I suppose, to be able to get away with he was just kidding around in founding the Fascism Forever Club. I don't imagine, for instance, that any of his fellow students who might have been African American would get away with or be able to shed having founded the New Black Panthers Club or something like that.
And, it's good that we wind up on this because I think that's going to be the rest of my segment theme here, with a real question as to what do you do about this particular nomination. Certainly you use the hearings as best you can to try to highlight this sort of stuff and make a spotlight, focus a lens, if you will, on the authoritarianism involved with the Trump administration and use this guy as the lens in terms of would you support this? If he did X, would you block it, and so on and so forth. Right. That's what the hearing should be, in my view. But whether or not he actually gets confirmed or doesn't get confirmed and whether the filibuster does or doesn't go down is a tricky issue.
Yeah.
For Democrats. I mean, I know where the base is, but for the Democrats in D.C., they're not quite there, and that lends me to a discussion we started yesterday. I have this nice article for you here. It's on the Skype list. I Skyped stuff to David so he could read along with some of the stuff I'm talking about. It's hard enough to reel in some of the flights of fancy and story arcs here unless you got some grounding with some written material here. And this one is called The Difference Between Activism and Advocacy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's from 2015, and it's by somebody who was an activist and became an advocate. Now, that's happened to me.
Uh-huh.
I've been an activist pushing the government on flu stuff and wound up being an advocate working with them. And the difference between an advocate and an activist in a separate article here is a simple one. Activism and advocacy are terms that are often used interchangeably, and while they do overlap, they have distinctly different meanings. An activist is a person who makes an intentional action to bring about social or political change. That would be the people in the demonstrations, let's say, on the street, or those who blog, or those who suggest that you do X, Y, or Z. An advocate is one who speaks on behalf of another person or a group, and in a general sense, activism can be described as intentional action to bring about social change, and advocates can be involved in issues and controversy too, but because they're speaking on behalf of a group, they tend to be more likely to follow the paths of lobbying and legislation. And so they are a bigger group than activists, and they tend to be a little, more conservative in terms of speed of action. And so sometimes it's one, sometimes the other. There aren't any specific lines, but, you can see that happen. You start out as an activist, and you say you should do this, you should do this, then you get a seat at the table, and then you start negotiating, and you find yourself an advocacy situation where you're trying to get stuff done for the group that you represent, but it's not all in your face anymore. And that's a pretty common thing that's happened to a whole lot of people.
Yes. I would go so far as to say that in general terms, the successful activist becomes an advocate. You generate a following of people who trust you for the consistency of your position and will push you forward when the powers that be offer up a seat at the table and say, well, we want to include your opinion in our deliberations. We need a representative from your group to sit with us and talk this out and make sure that it's something you approve of. That's your advocate.
Right. Or even if it's not something you approve, at least we want to clearly show that we have heard your voice, and that in and of itself can be important, particularly if what you're trying to say happens to be important and the logic of it in and of itself, carries the day, which on occasion does happen when you're talking policy. So let's say that the person who gets the seat at the table is actually literally the activist who got elected.
Okay.
right? Could happen, does happen.
Yes.
So now they're in Washington, and they have to make the decision, do I vote yes or no on what clearly is a competent candidate who isn't a bit, a DeVos or Ben Carson who just has no business whatsoever even being in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you do? And what kind of considerations are there? And so the activists have a really easy time, just filibuster. And the advocate has to say, okay, well, but I also have these other competing things here, and I'm going to lose anyway. And what do I get out of it? And we got to weigh all of this stuff. And what's it going to mean the next appointment? And what's it going to mean for everything else that we're trying to do here? And it's hard. So now you have a situation where it's not clear to me. For example, we talked about this yesterday. Blue state Democrats in red states who happen to be senators don't have a free ticket to do whatever they want with every vote. They just don't. So what do? And if that's the case, can you hold everybody? Can you hold enough to make it a 60-vote threshold? And even though that may be the goal for a variety of reasons we talked about yesterday, can you reach it? And what happens if you don't? How do you go down not looking like you just got rolled and by doing nothing? How do you go down by making significant points that will come up later that will be to your benefit? These are all difficult decisions that the advocates have to make when they are at that table or in that committee meeting or in that vote.
I think that makes good sense. That's another piece of the puzzle, for sure.
Yeah, so what do you do? And so, I think you and Armando come down on the side of maybe just filibuster anyway because there's a lot of reasons, including history, and it's dumb and get rid of it, and that may help us in the future and expose stuff. I don't want to speak for you. I don't know where you come down. And that's powerful. But the other side of it is, but if you're going to pick something to really make a stand on, do you do it in the hearings just by pointing out the lens of what this guy is? And yet if you don't have the votes, then balancing that too. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know what the right answer is.
It's a difficult thing to puzzle through. It's easy to come to the conclusion or to understand the conclusion that the thing to do is to make the stand. Especially, I've always believed that Republicans would simply do away with the filibuster when it became inconvenient for them, and I haven't really changed my view of that, and certainly nothing about the Trump administration changes my view of that. And so, to me, the argument that there's strategic value in having this fight next time, I think you make a good point. But just as the outcome here is predetermined, the outcome there is also predetermined. Right. So it's a wash. So what are you going to do right now? Well, coin toss. You don't think it's the right thing to do? I do. All right. What are we going to do? How are we going to make it work?
Right, and that's a great summary, because this is not one of those things where if you don't agree with me, you're like totally wrong and I'm never talking to you again. This is a tough one, and so you can see how somebody can fall on either side. The cabinet situation is a little bit different in my view. To me, the only truly dangerous one, who everybody should fight like down to the death, is Sessions. DeVos and then a little bit less so Carson don't belong there because they're completely dunderhead unqualified. But that's a different issue. And everybody else I don't really care about because they're figureheads anyway. That Trump isn't going to listen to.
I could see that being, that's an understandable position too. And again, then the question also becomes, well, okay, but do we get anything? And this is a calculus for senators to make politically based on the electorate they have at home.
Yes.
Does it hurt to say this person is a total incompetent? I vote no. Does it hurt to say this person isn't necessarily a total incompetent, but what the hell would I help the chowderhead who nominated him for? I'm not going to do that. And to see whether, there are people at home that there really are people who are like, well, geez, still got to give them a chance to govern. Well, if you got more of them than your neighbor, you might have to. And
they live in your state or your district. Right. That is definitely a consideration. And look how it's playing out. It's a
stupid idea, but okay, you know what? I'll give you a chance to govern with the person who, for instance, is a retired general and being named to head up the Defense Department. I don't like the waiver thing, but that doesn't, strike me as outlandish in the same way as, well, I'll make even Rick Perry, Secretary of Energy. Okay, it's not really about oil drilling. Oh, well, all right, too late to change that. But again, is that one disastrous? I don't know. You vote against him for other reasons, but I think I generally agree with the ranking of the threat that the various cabinet members pose. From my position, and we're seeing it being fought out here in Virginia. In Virginia, I think you can probably get away with simply saying, this guy's adult, and the people he nominates are varying degrees of stupid to dangerous to useless, and I don't approve of any of them. But and that's where Tim Kaine finds himself.
But reasons, he took a while to get there, and it's okay to let him do that. He is an advocate. Don't expect him to say on day one without any thought, I oppose them all.
Mark Warner is playing the other direction and saying, I still think that the majority of Virginians prefer to give the president a chance and will call him out when he sucks, but at the moment he hasn't really reached that threshold, with possibly the exception of Jeff Sessions. Yeah, Warner, Warner could stand a few more phone calls, I think. And as the nominations get more and more contentious as we go on, you might see his voting begin to change. And it might be phone calls, or it might be the quality of the nominees declining. We'll see. Oh, I think I just kicked a... oh, dear. I think I knocked out my connection here by accidentally booting things here. All right. Well, I believe we will. You'll hear this on the podcast. This is very interesting, and I guess we'll have to have a little bit of a discussion with the fam when they get home. Someone has been monkeying with the power strip, which powers everything we've got. And it was left on the floor in a position in which a slight foot twitch will accidentally hit the on-off switch of the power strip, which powers the PC and thankfully not my laptop, which runs at least the podcasting, but also takes out the router and the modem and all the things that connect me to you live. So we'll be back on the air in just a few minutes. I'm sure Justice is panicking. Sorry to have panicked the rest of you, but we'll try and get back online, and we'll make sure that we don't miss anything. The only thing we miss, of course, is the end of Greg's segment, which is particularly valuable as this is Thursday and we won't have him back tomorrow. So I apologize, Greg. Maybe we can run down a few more of your stories in the interim, but or rather during the rest of the show at any rate. But I'll use the interim here in getting everything back online. It'll still take us another 2 or 3 minutes before everything is powered back up and back online. But we'll use the interim to discuss a couple of other interesting angles on yesterday's stories. As I mentioned to you, Trump went or held an event, I guess, inside the White House to mark the beginning of February as African American. They're now calling it African American History Month as opposed to Black History Month. I'm not sure. I don't know that there was any official declaration for doing that, but maybe he thought he was being more politically sensitive, even if he won't admit to being politically correct, by calling it African American History Month. But I think everybody's come to know it as Black History Month, and gosh, I don't think that there's been a resurgence and a renewal in the I guess the acceptability of just using the term black as opposed to African American all the time. It's been kind of an interesting dynamic in the language there, I think. I don't know. Maybe I misread it. Anyway, widespread surprise, let's say, at his remarks on the beginning of Black History Month, and we'll get to it. Let me just check out for a second here so I can monitor the situation and see exactly what's going on there. There we are. Here's my message from Greg, so that means we're at least back online. And we'll tell him if you have time, try again and just finish up. But I'll explain to him if he gets back here exactly what happened. You all know what happened. Oh, no, you don't. You weren't hearing this live either. But if you're listening on podcast, well, okay, you understand the time travel aspects of that. Hi, Greg. I'm sorry.
Hey.
I was just explaining to everybody, we're going to have a discussion with the family members when they get home. Somebody has somebody left the power strip into which everything is plugged
Out?
Yes, underneath my desk with the on-off switch pointed directly at my toe, which is strategically awfully stupid. But I won't say that because that'll get back to them.
That's right. Don't blame them. No shaming. Okay. Remember, that's our theme here.
Yes, right. Okay, so that was that was close to almost voting for Trump. That was so dumb.
Yeah. Don't do that. But anyway, so you're back. Thank you. And I was just going to finish up anyway and say that the whole idea here of everything that happened is devoted to trying to decide what to do. And as you have pointed out, it's not an easy thing to do. Therefore, the advocates and the activists have to get on the same page, but that's going to take a while. The activists are going to be more vociferous and forward about what to do. The advocates are going to be in the situation of trying to weigh all this stuff and won't be able to make a decision quite that quickly, and that's okay. And in the end, I think they'll get to be on the same page. I don't think this is going to be the same way as, let's say, the Tea Party and the Republicans were, where the Republicans became terrified of the Tea Party, embraced the Tea Party, became the Tea Party. Democrats are just different. We work differently. We're a little bit more logical and rational about it. And I don't see, for example, Democrats trying to primary every single Democrat who doesn't do what we want. So I just see it ending a little bit differently, and I'm just saying, you got to have a little bit of tolerance for the difference between advocacy and activism, because there's going to be times that your representatives and senators don't do exactly what you want, and maybe they have reasons.
Yes, because reasons.
Because reasons.
That's enough for me. Yeah. Well, look, this is
it's hard.
One of the tasks of coalition participation and leadership, both, is that occasionally members of your coalition disappoint you, stray, have a different idea than you do, or might be right where you're wrong and you don't realize it yet. I don't know, but it can't be run and maintained with, well, if you cross me, even if I do represent or have the proxy of the majority, and you're out. That's not the way coalitions have ever worked. So,
right.
A good caution, no doubt. And it's annoying, but really, actually, kind of do have to be reminded of that every day. It won't necessarily convert you on the spot, but perhaps by a slow process of erosion will break you down, and you can join the well-weathered coalition.
Right. Anyway, so in general, you kind of accept the thrust of all of that? I mean, it's a little complicated, but activists and advocates are different. We do see what's happening in the White House. I think that, it's basically the way we laid it out for the week. It's, don't shame the Trump voters. Keep an eye on Bannon. Bannon is being exposed. A lot written about him. I think we were right last week and the week before to put our finger on chaos as the overarching story arc, and it looks like everything that we said is actually accurate in that regard. That helps us not to focus and go nuts on every individual thing that he does, because there's going to be 40 a day. And at the same time, putting the focus on Bannon has been good because it's made him make enemies within the White House, get Trump annoyed for the President Bannon stuff. It's made things pull back a little bit. He's not gone. He won't be gone. He's joined at the hip with Trump. But understanding his role, I think, is going to be vital. One thing we didn't even talk about is the reorientation away from investigating violence for all groups, including white nationalists, and trying to focus it on Islamists alone. Radical Islam, as they call it.
Right.
The point being that if you don't look at the white nationalists as being the bomb throwers, which in fact they are, the Timothy McVeighs of the world, that benefits Bannon, the white nationalist in the White House. We have to keep focus on that.
Yeah.
And doing all of that at the same time as trying to maintain our coalition and not splintering it because the advocates don't work as fast as the activists want, I think is going to be key, because right now they hold a lot more cards than we do in D.C. And that's my summary for the week.
All right. Well, we'll take it. And yeah, we did miss that very important point. Yeah, I'll have to find an article just in case you happen to have missed the story. We'll wind that up. But yes, and we don't have to go back to Timothy McVeigh.
And I think it's a big one. Right?
Yeah. Oh, it's huge. I mean, it's something that Republicans have been interested in for a long time, but it's never really gone the way it is now, hand in glove with permanent residence inside the Oval Office of actual white nationalists. It's always sort of been like, well, I don't know. We think like they might be voting our way, so we don't. P.S. Also, we want to try and focus on Islamic terrorism for other political reasons. Here it's as direct a relationship as you've ever seen. I don't want to go to jail, so look the other way.
Right. So I'm going to send you this Reuters article, I think, which kind of Reuters is pretty good. Exclusive, Trump to focus counter-extremism program solely on Islam, according to sources. So I'll leave that with you. Sign off and say it's been great talking with my friend David Waldman here on Kagro in the Morning. We do that. I do it a couple of times a week when I listen to him most weekdays when he's here. And we thank you all for listening to us by download, podcast, however you do it. Sometimes we have time. Armando can come on and tell me why I'm completely wrong. It's really great when he does because incredible insight there. Remember, Armando's the guy that goes from step 1 to step 10 and skips steps 2 through 9, explaining how we got there, and then wants to know how come you just don't agree with him and why you even bringing it up. And that's fine. But sometimes we got to go through the steps one by one to really see why people are doing what we're doing, and we think that's important too. Take care,
Yes.
and I'll be back on Monday.
Okay, thanks very much, Greg. I hope I don't unplug anything else between now and then.
You never know.
Gosh. All right. Thanks for standing by, though.
Yep, take care.
Appreciate
Bye.
it. Take care. Have a good weekend, the best we can. Hopefully there won't be a war between now and then, and we'll all make it to the other side. Yes, lots of people do go from step 1 to step 10. The interesting thing, of course, is we have to find the people who go from step 1 to the correct step 10 and get them to explain their steps 2 through 9 to the rest of us, and also clearly identify those who go from step 1 to the wrong step 10 and show why that happened, in case you don't get it just as a gut feeling. And then we have to have small committee meetings where we decide whether or not it's okay to punch those people. So there's a lot on our plate. It's a busy time. Okay, so speaking of committees, sort of, I'll take a short detour, I guess. Oh, no. Well, where should I put this in the order of things? Let's go back. Before we reconnected with Greg, I was about to discuss the fact that that Trump held his Black History Month event in a way that only Trump could do it, right? Okay, I believe it was inside the White House. And he assembled a group and invited some people in, and then he had his own special gang that went with him. So he was like, Black History Month, okay? Or, I need some black people. Where's the one that I had at the rally? I don't know. Not sure where he went to. Okay, well, what have I got? Ben Carson, he's black. I'll bring him with me. And Omarosa. Omarosa is also black. I'll bring her, and we'll have a Black History Month event. And he gave some remarks, and they were terrible. To put to put it in one word. But interestingly, here's a good a catch and a good point out from Hunter, who tweeted this out, and this also becomes a theme. Keep in mind, not only you probably already know the story of the remarks about Black History Month. And you now know the story, of course, of how Trump spent time on the calls with the Prime Minister of Australia and the President of Mexico, talking about his inauguration crowd and the size of his electoral victory. And take that in context with what Hunter was writing about he was actually referring to the call with the PM of Australia. He says an NPD sufferer, remember narcissistic personality disorder, an NPD sufferer will reliably direct discussion back to himself and his own deeds over all other topics, even as the act baffles onlookers. Sounds like it rather perfectly describes the call with the PM of Australia and with the President of Mexico and, frankly, with the group assembled for Black History Month, which I think the facts will demonstrate in just a moment, and, of course, this morning with the National Prayer Breakfast. Again, he gathers the group together, or they gather themselves together, and he goes to visit, and he tells them nothing national, nothing about prayer, and certainly no comments about breakfast, I guess, unless they were edited out. But no, we're going to talk about The Apprentice, its ratings, and compare it to The Celebrity Apprentice. That has nothing to do with any part of any of this. I think they may have him dead to rights on this NPD stuff. Okay, so I guess the thing I'll add to the fact of his remarks about Black History Month is a very interesting take I saw on it, which is to actually just reprint the whole thing verbatim, but to reprint the whole thing verbatim at McSweeney's as a humor piece. This is very interesting. This is, I guess, well, what did they do with this thing? Where's I was told, now I guess I have to check this because I'm looking at McSweeney's here and it says short imagined monologues is the section, I guess, that they've put in here. But this was presented to me, I think Kylie Joy Gray was the one who pointed this out to me just via Twitter. I don't know, see if I can pull that one up. But anyway, it was presented to me as they have just taken this thing verbatim and printed it in McSweeney's, and it's hard to tell because you don't know whether they're joking or not because you can't tell whether he is joking or not. But I didn't really look at the transcript anywhere else. I wonder if I can find it just to follow along, or maybe some of you have seen it and you can verify one way or the other whether it is exact or not. Let's see. So transcript, Trump, Black History. It actually comes up in Google. Seriously, I typed transcript Trump and it completed it. I didn't do anything else, not even a B. Black History. So let me see the Atlanta Journal-Constitution version of it. Does it start the same way? I don't know whether it begins at the same spot or not. But now I'm kind of doubting things. Oh, is there going to be auto-playing video? We'll try and... No, there it is. Okay, so I believe that it is, in fact, just dead on transcript. Yep. So even though it comes under the heading of short imagined monologues, this is a short actual monologue. The title is not actual. They added that. My Very Good Black History Month Tribute to Some of the Most Tremendous Black People by Donald J. Trump. And I don't think I could make it in Trump voice all the way through this thing. But certainly, I'm imagining the inflection, but we'll add it. But this is it. If you saw it, fine, we'll discuss it along the way. If you didn't see it or didn't hear it all, you'll just be amazed. This is literally actually verbatim word for word what he said. Well, the election, it came out really well. Again, this is a Black History Month discussion. His election is not part of Black history, but that's how he starts. Well, the election, it came out really well. Next time, we'll triple the number or quadruple it. What's he talking about? Of course, the black vote. That we will triple or quadruple my support among the African American voters. Yeah, right. Okay. And then he says, we want to get it over 51, right? At least 51%, I assume he means. Well, this is Black History Month. So this is our little breakfast, our little get-together. Hi, Lynn. How are you? Just a few notes. During this month, just a few notes, a few a few notes on what. Okay, during this month, we honor the tremendous history of African Americans throughout our country, throughout the world, if you really think about it, right? And their story is one of unimaginable sacrifice, hard work, and faith in America. I've gotten a real glimpse during the campaign. I'd go around with Ben, who's black, right next to me. Can you believe it? He didn't say that part. But I'd go around with Ben to a lot of different places I wasn't so familiar with. The people are black there. I didn't have any experience with it, but I brought him. I figured I was safe. Right? I guess I'll whisper all the asides. Some different places I wasn't so familiar with. They're incredible people. And I want to thank Ben Carsons, who's going to be heading up HUD. That's a big job. That's a job that's not only housing, but it's mind and spirit. Right, Ben? And you understand, nobody's going to be better than Ben. Last month, we celebrated the life of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., whose incredible example is unique in American history. You read all about Dr. Martin Luther King a week ago. Now, you did because it was his, there was Martin Luther King Day. But is that why you read all about Dr. Martin Luther King a week ago? No, of course not. We're talking to a president with narcissistic personality disorder. Are you ready? You read all about Dr. Martin Luther King a week ago when somebody said, I took the statue out of my office. It turned out that was fake news. Fake news. The statue is cherished. It's one of the favorite things and we have some good ones. We have Lincoln, and we have Jefferson, and we have Dr. Martin Luther King. But they said the statue, the bust of Martin Luther King, was taken out of the office, and it was never even touched. So I think it was a disgrace. But that's the way the press is. Very unfortunate. Okay, pause. I guess the most technical point we can make from all of this is remember that, of course, the White House's explanation for the Martin Luther King bust situation was that it was moved from one location inside the Oval Office to another. It used to have a far more prominent location next to the president's desk, which would mean it would show up in photographs all the time, and it would be in plain view when the press was invited into the White House or into the Oval Office to observe something, and the president would do that thing over by the desk. You would then see the Martin Luther King bust. But it's been moved. That spot now occupied by the Winston Churchill bust, which was a cause celeb on right-wing talk radio a couple of years ago, which is why Donald Trump now has this newfound interest in Winston Churchill. He's got no idea, I'm sure. He probably knows who Winston Churchill is. I don't think he's quite that dumb. But as for preference of whose bust would be near his desk, I'm sure he didn't care one way or the other, but he knows that it was an issue about the Winston Churchill thing, and it was a fake issue at that, way back when. So, he gets all his ideas from television and talk radio. I don't know if he listens to talk radio, maybe a little bit. Probably Howard Stern more than anything else. Maybe a little bit of Rush Limbaugh, but mostly it just filters to him through morning television. So to the extent that Fox and Friends covered the Winston Churchill thing, that's how he got wind of it. Anyway, it got moved from one location to another according to the White House. Although, again, still, with the fact that they are serial liars, I wouldn't put it past them to have actually moved the bust out of the Oval Office and then seeing that they had been called out on it, hustling it back in and putting it in another location and saying it had been there the whole time. We really don't know. We don't know for sure. There might exist some photo evidence out there somewhere, but photos that are distributed from inside the Oval Office on that particular day are mostly facing the desk, and or later on it faces, I guess, the fireplace. They staged a few photos in front of there, and that's where the bust ended up anyway. I got no evidence that says that the thing was really out there, other than the fact that they're idiots and serial liars, and probably I wouldn't put it past them to do something like that. Anyway, the more important part, really, is that the reporter who originally said that the bust had been moved out of the Oval Office, and I think, let's see, it was it Zach Miller? Is that his last name? I think I did this last time too, and I couldn't quite remember what it was. But I think that's, well, maybe I have the name wrong. Anyway, the important part is that when he found out later or heard from the White House that they had, in fact, that they say that they had kept the bust inside the White House or inside the Oval Office and had just moved it, and it had been behind, I think Kellyanne Conway said it was behind a guard or something. It was standing in front of it, and they couldn't see it. And so anyway, the reporter was called upon to apologize and retract the story, and he did it. And by the way, so this is the thanks you get when they call you out and they say, oh, fake news. Again, the 5-year-old explanation. You lied. You're a liar. Fake news. Well, I made a mistake. I didn't see it. It's really not even a material point. But, okay, you deserve an apology and a retraction and a correction to the story, and here it is. A week later, he's still going snowflake over this thing, crying about it to the point where he's wasting time at the African American or the Black History Month breakfast, the kickoff breakfast. He's still crying about, oh, the press is unfair to me. And you want to know why? This is important. This will be important to you because you guys are African Americans. It was about them accusing me of moving the Martin Luther King bust out of the Oval Office. He's black, right? So, yeah, okay. So I'm on topic. I'm germane here. The guy is a moron. Anyway, not only that, he's a. I hate to use the term. It always disturbs me when people use the butthurt term, but that sort of seems to fit the bill here. I think that's a stupid and, well, it's right up there with cuck. So I guess I'll use it tongue in cheek, I suppose. But yeah, I like here's a term for you to pick up on: go snowflake, because it occurred to me as I was saying that not only is that it seems rather powerful way of turning their own latest term around on them, but it's also reminiscent of going galt, which they thought was some heroic act of patriotism. And it occurred to me that going galt was the same thing as going snowflake. Oh, you don't want you say you don't value my contribution to society? Well, I'm going to take my ball and go home. It's the same thing. So feel free to adopt it. It's yours. Back to the ridiculous speech. After crying about the event of a week ago, which was apologized for, retracted, corrected, etc. So again, I will just point out that it gains you nothing. Next time he asks you for correction, you say, why don't you go F yourself, because you're just going to cry about it in an event next week anyway. There's no satisfying you because you're a grudge-holding baby idiot. You could just say that. And you won't have to retract that. That'll be correct. I'll stand by that report. So he went on to say, by the way, I am very proud now that we have a museum on the National Mall where people can learn about Reverend King, so many other things. Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, I noticed. Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, and millions more black Americans who made America what it is today. Big impact. That's so maybe middle school level. It's nuts. And of course, the rest of the day then became, does the president know that Frederick Douglass is dead? It's not entirely clear that he's using past tense here. And we thought maybe Sean Spicer could clear that up, but he made the same mistake. And their mangled syntax makes it unclear that they're aware of when Frederick Douglass lived and died. And I just thought, how non-committal. What does that even mean? Well, he's being recognized more and more, I noticed. He's recognized wherever he goes. Not that he goes anywhere. He's dead. He's a recognizable figure. His hair is recognized. What do you mean? More and more people are discovering that there was a Frederick Douglass. I don't know. I'm proud to honor this heritage and will be honoring it more and more. Again, with the more and more. The folks at the table, in almost all cases, have been great friends and supporters. Daryl, I don't know who Daryl is, but I met Daryl when he was defending me on television. There you go. That's how he figured out who he was. I saw him on television. So he's here now. And the people that were on the other side of the argument didn't have a chance, right? And Paris, I don't know who that was, has done an amazing job in a very hostile CNN community. He's all by himself. You'll have 7 people in Paris, and I'll take Paris over the 7. But I don't watch CNN, he now claims. So I don't get to see you as much as I used to. I don't like watching fake news, but Fox has treated me very nice, wherever Fox is. Thank you. Right, so again, a personal plug for that. By the way, remember, I don't watch CNN, because that comes up later again, I think. We're going to need better schools, and we need them soon. We need more jobs. We need better wages, a lot better wages. We're going to work very hard on the inner city. Remember, I just remembered I'm here for black people. Inner city. Yeah, there you go. Ben is going to be doing that. Big league. That's one of the things that you're going to be looking at. We need safer communities, and we're going to do that with law enforcement, which is a huge boon, I'm sure, to the African American community. They can't wait for more law enforcement. Maybe they'll be a little more conscious of not shooting them rather than, as opposed to just like maybe helping them out. I'm sure it's not that the African American communities are opposed to policing. They just wish they would actually protect and serve is all, but okay, whatever. We're going to make it safe. We're going to make it much better than it is now. Right now, it's terrible. You all live in hellholes. And I saw you talking about it the other night, Paris, on something else that was really, you did a fantastic job the other night on a very unrelated show. I don't know who Paris is, but I brought up the CNN thing only because is this a CNN broadcaster, or is it just somebody who happens to be on CNN frequently and he could have been somewhere else too? Because I don't know. He just said, I don't watch CNN. It's fake news. I saw you the other night on CNN. I'm ready to do my part, and I will say this. We're going to work together. This is a great group. This is a group that's been so special to me. You really helped me a lot. If you remember, I wasn't going to do well with the African American community, and after they heard me speaking and talking about the inner city and lots of other things, we ended up getting, I won't go into details, but we ended up getting substantially more than other candidates who had run in past years. So there you go. There's a fact check for you. Did Donald Trump get, what's he referring to? Substantially more of the black vote than other candidates in the past? And I suppose he's trying to compare himself to Republican candidates. I guess we have to check on how did he do and call him out on that one. And we're going to take that to new levels. I want to thank my television star over here. Omarosa's actually a very nice person. Nobody knows that. I don't want to destroy her reputation, but she's a very good person, and she's been helpful right from the beginning of the campaign, and I really appreciate it. I really do. Very special. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Now, this part would be where a normal president would then go into black history and what it means to them. But this is actually the end of President Trump's remarks. That's it. He wanted to let you know that he had some black friends, and there they were. And that your life is horrible because you're black, and I'm going to make it better because I'm white, and that's what we do. And also, let me just say, Frederick Douglass is somebody who's being recognized more and more. Sean Spicer later on was saying something about it, and he's going to accomplish even more and more, or whatever, I don't know. Again, no indication that they had any idea even what historical era he belonged to. And, the sum of his remarks about Dr. Martin Luther King. He had a dream, and his dream was that I would correct the record about where his bust was. The struggle is real, ladies and gentlemen, and it's mine, and I invite you to it. So, there you go. Narcissistic personality disorder on display once again. No surprise or anything like that, but I just found it, let's say, revealing to have so many examples of it in such a short amount of time. All right. Now, I guess at this point, just to keep current, do we stop and go over to the White House or the Washington Post reporting on the telephone calls just to get the verbatim transcript bits on the record? Or have you all heard them by now and you don't need to be reminded? I mean, I don't know. I also saw a tweet this morning that apparently at some point, when the call ended with the Australian Prime Minister, it was Trump pulling the phone away from his ear and saying, I want off this call. And then they just clicked. That's the end of it. I don't know. Anyway, I guess I'll just include the Washington Post report for you to take a look. There are some remarkable quotes from it, to say the least, up to and including the one where Trump berates the Australian Prime Minister and says that this is the worst call yet, which is just like, I guess at that point, that must be what's turning people white, although they were already white to begin with. Anyway, it's just it was unbelievable. So if you haven't read it, I'll give you the chance to read it on your own. Here's something, turning now, I guess, to the content you won't get anywhere else, but you will here on the Kagro in the Morning Show. We talked about this just as breaking news yesterday, that in order to further the nominations, in order to report out the nominations of Steve Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary and Tom Price as HHS Secretary, the committees changed their rules, or the committee, as it turns out, singular, changed the rules. I thought perhaps that HHS was being considered before the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and they may have had a hearing or two with respect to the HHS nomination. But in fact, the procedure and the report in question was from the Finance Committee. I understand why the Finance Committee was looking at the Treasury Secretary, and certainly there's a big finance component in what HHS covers too, but apparently they had the opportunity to review that nomination and were expected to report it out as well. That was just that I didn't know about. I guess a little bit of thought after the fact makes it clear that, okay, they'll certainly want to. But it could be more than one referral on that one. I'm not really sure. I've not watched as closely in the past to which committees these nominations are referred, because the nominations process has never been so remarkable as this one has been. There haven't been so many people who are incompetent to the task or just purely wrong for the job for a number of reasons, as it has been this time. Anyway, so yesterday it was only the Finance Committee that was changing its rules. And as we noted during the show, we looked it up, the rules of the Finance Committee were that a quorum required, a quorum for conducting any business at all apparently required 1/3 of the committee. And we were also looking at the Judiciary Committee rules. And Orrin Hatch was the one who did the monkeying with the rules of the Judiciary Committee with respect to blue slips and nominations, and the requirement of, we saw yesterday that the Judiciary Committee requires 2 members of the minority to be there, and the Finance Committee requires only 1 member of the minority. But when they changed the rules a few years back temporarily in order to get George W. Bush's judicial nominees through, it was Orrin Hatch that did the deed. Now Orrin Hatch is the chairman of the Finance Committee, and the former chairman of the Finance Committee, I believe, Chuck Grassley, now has taken the gavel over at the Judiciary Committee. There's not, there's only 52 Republican senators to go round. Senators, almost every senator gets the chairmanship of something somewhere, whether it's subcommittee or full committee. The more senior senators, of course, get those full committees. Anyway, so once again, rules are being changed, and once again, it's Orrin Hatch with the gavel getting the job done. So I mentioned to you, it's doable. It's certainly imaginable. I wasn't as familiar with the rules of the Finance Committee, but I imagine that you could, just the same as you would on the floor, basically nuclear option the rules. The speculation yesterday, I think, was, you just say, okay, our quorum rules require X number of senators, and it turns out, I think, to be 1/3. But at least one of the members from each party, each party has to be represented in order to establish a quorum above and beyond the 1/3 of the members. And that you could just change that rule and not require the presence of anyone from the minority party if you nuclear option the rules. The rules do say that you can't conduct any business without a member of the minority. Certainly changing the rules would be conducting business. So how do you get around that problem? Well, you get around it with a mini nuclear option. You move that the rules be changed, or as actually happened in procedure yesterday, and we'll demonstrate it later. The motion was to suspend the rules for the day with respect to these nominations, and then change it back, by the way, and do away with the requirement of a member of both parties being there. And Hatch handled it as somebody who cares at least a little bit about the rules might have preferred. So, at least he did that. So what happened? Well, you know what? As it happens, I have in my hand, I do have a link to video of yesterday's session. It's a little bit difficult to pull up exactly what we need because the video doesn't start right away, but I have a vague sense of where this thing occurred during the video, and we'll jump to it and take a listen to exactly how they did it. But just so it's clear when and if we're able to actually roll the video, what happened is this. The chairman is Orrin Hatch, and he arranges for one of the members of the majority, Senator Isaacson from Georgia, to move that the rules requiring a member of the minority to be there in order to establish a quorum for doing business be suspended for the day with respect to these two nominations, and then that's put to the chair. And because he cares about the rules, Orrin Hatch says, okay, the motion is to suspend these rules, but we have a problem. Because the rules already state that a member of the minority has to be there, and a member of the minority is not here to conduct the business of whether or not to suspend the rules, the motion is improper, and it's out of order, and I can't help you. However, I now object to my own ruling from the chair and appeal my own ruling from the chair, and will take a vote. In other words, use the nuclear option. I appealed my own ruling from the chair that this is an improper motion that is out of order to suspend the rules. Now, let's everybody vote on whether or not you agree with me that my ruling is wrong. And lo and behold, unanimously, the Republicans of the committee, all 14 of them in attendance, did in fact agree to find that the chair is wrong. The defense is wrong. Just to borrow the phrase, once again from my cousin Vinny, which really explains everything in the world. Long-time listeners will know. So 14-0, they voted to overrule the chair's ruling that it would be improper to entertain a motion to change the rules, even temporarily, without a member of the minority party there. So the effect of that then is held to be, it must be okay. If the ruling that it's not okay is unanimously overridden, then it must mean it's okay. Now, that's not necessarily true either. All it says is, well, the chair is wrong. Now, what does that mean? Honestly, when they had the original actual nuclear option, constitutional option, in 1975, to change the rules in the full Senate on the House floor about the filibuster and lower the threshold from 2/3 to 3/5 back in 1975, they actually had just this kind of discussion afterwards because it was held, and this is sort of parliamentary practice now. It's common, but I just want to point out that, when the other side, people who now I think represent pretty much the mainstream of the Republican Party in this scenario anyway, when they lost that vote, they pointed out, and it's not without merit to point out, well, wait a second, just because the majority says that the chair was wrong about this doesn't mean that that the motion was right. It just means the chair ruled on it incorrectly, and now we should have to vote on whether or not the underlying motion, was meritorious. But they skipped that part, And it has, even before then, it was always just sort of parliamentary practice that, say, a motion to table a point of order would have the effect of adopting the opposite position, which it really shouldn't automatically do. I know that's a little bit complicated. Maybe it will clear it up if we actually roll this. Now that we've explained at least the basics of the procedure, it'll be interesting for you to hear it done, and then we'll point out something else about this. So again, it's Isaacson proposing that they suspend the rules, Hatch saying, no, we're not allowed to have a vote on whether or not to suspend the rules because there's no member of the minority here. I now appeal that ruling. They gave the correct ruling, and then, honestly, I really would ask somebody else to appeal the ruling of the chair just to separate myself from it a little bit. But he objects to his own ruling, appeals his own ruling, knowing that, of course, it will be overturned 14-0, and then interprets that appeal to mean that the motion is, in fact, in order. And then they entertain the motion, and it, too, passes 14-0. And then, afterwards, the favorable reporting out of the nominations of Stephen Mnuchin and then Tom Price, also each getting a 14-0 vote. Then we'll listen into, so I'll play you the actual footage of it, and then we'll pause one more time just to take a moment to discuss something I think that might be important, and we got to make our senators aware of. Let's see, I got to jump forward in here. This is it's a long, 33-minute video, but the first 15 to 20 minutes of it, the Senate or the committee actually doesn't gavel in. So I gotta, here we go. Here we are. So
the Finance Committee has always.
All right. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to have to jump around a little bit until I find the actual beginning of the video. Here we are.
We're here this morning under extraordinary circumstances. The Senate Finance Committee has a long, storied tradition for temperance and bipartisanship.
And that's really
in times of fierce political and partisan conflict, when Congress has found itself facing seemingly insurmountable tension and gridlock, the Senate Finance Committee has always been the exception.
This, of course, Orrin Hatch, chairman of the committee, reading his statement.
That tradition of this committee was, for the first time in modern history, broken yesterday, as our colleagues, without notice and without warning, opted to stage a publicity stunt in the hallway instead of sitting here at the dais and doing their jobs. Their unprecedented boycott has left us with precious few options.
I'll also pause here, and perhaps later on, I don't know whether we're going to get all the way through all of the audio from it, but the unprecedented boycott, which he later says is pathetic, etc., I've been reminded, in 2013, and I believe behind or including Senator Hatch himself, the Republicans did the exact same thing. I don't know what committee it was in, but they have boycotted it, as recently as 2013. So unprecedented unless you count the ones that came before, which we did, which, your basic gimmitarian position.
These are important nominations to positions that desperately need to be filled. It is also important that we don't set a precedent that allows the customary good faith that has historically governed the operations of this committee to be cast aside whenever one side wants to gain a political advantage. With those concerns in mind, I recognize Senator Isaacson to make a unanimous consent request.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that we temporarily suspend the Rule 4 and all other applicable Finance Committee rules of procedure to report out the nominations of Stephen Mnuchin as Secretary of Treasury and Dr. Thomas Price as Secretary of Health and Human Services, and that all other rules come back in operation at the conclusion of today's vote.
Okay, so did you hear the way he puts that one? He wants to suspend the rules, and I think it's Rule 19 that governs suspension of the rules in this committee. So I want to suspend the rules with respect to these two nominations, and then put that rule back in force at the conclusion of today's business. It's a pretty specific request. So we'll continue on from there. All right, fine. It's sharp elbowed.
Pursuant to Rule 2A of the committee rules, the chair rules that the unanimous consent request is not germane, as it was not part of the original notice of this executive session. The request is therefore is out of order. I now appeal my own ruling.
Okay, slightly different take here. It's not necessarily that there isn't a member of the minority present, and this makes for a cleaner, technically, a cleaner break in using the nuclear option here. It's not that we are using the nuclear option to do away temporarily with the rule that says a member of the minority has to be there. No, your request is out of order because it wasn't germane to the originally announced schedule of today's proceedings. It's out of order for two reasons. One, because we can't entertain it because there isn't a member of the minority here. But two, because it wasn't germane to the announced schedule of the day. I'll rule on that one and then do what?
And call for the yeas and nays.
Once again, I'll play it again.
And that all other rules come back in operation at the conclusion of today's vote.
That's Isaacson.
Pursuant to Rule 2A of the committee rules, the chair rules that the unanimous consent request is not germane as it was not part of the original notice of this executive session. The request is therefore out of order. I now appeal my own ruling. And call for the yeas and nays.
Now, so we're going to call for the roll call vote on this, and we'll play this through because this will help us make another point. But yeah, it's very interesting, and I thought very smart, really, in hindsight, to rule the motion out of order for a reason other than the absence of anyone from the minority. So here comes the roll call.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Grassley. Aye. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Crapo. Aye. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Roberts. Aye. Mr. Roberts, aye. Mr. Enzi. Aye. Mr. Enzi, aye. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Burr. Mr. Burr, aye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Isaacson, aye. Mr. Portman. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, aye. Mr. Heller. Mr. Heller, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman votes aye.
The clerk will announce the vote.
Mr. Chairman, the final tally is 14 ayes, 0 nays.
2/3 of the members present having voted in the affirmative, the unanimous consent request is agreed to.
Now, interesting. Okay, so 2/3 of those having voted in the affirmative. I guess it takes 2/3 to overrule the ruling of the chair, which he did correctly, but then appealed immediately by himself, of himself, I guess I should say, so that they could reverse this thing. Now, okay, so you heard the call of the roll and then the immediate reporting of the 14-0 vote. No surprise there. Now we'll move on, and I'll explain a little bit why in a minute.
Rule 4 and all other applicable rules are hereby suspended for the votes on these two nominations. At this time, I would entertain a motion to favorably report the nomination of Stephen Mnuchin to be the Secretary of the Treasury. So moved. It's been so moved. The clerk will call the roll.
Okay, so we move immediately on. It takes only 5 minutes to get all this work done. So here we are on the roll call on favorably reporting the nomination of Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary. Again, I'll play it for you. It's tedious, but listen to the call of the roll and see if you can tell the difference between the way this roll call was called and the previous one was.
On Stephen Mnuchin.
Mr. Grassley. Aye. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Crapo. Aye. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, aye. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi, aye.
So
Mr.
far the
Cornyn.
same, right?
Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Burr.
He's got that clerk
Mr.
voice.
Burr, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Isaacson.
Mr. Burr, yes.
Mr. Isaacson,
Mr. Burr,
aye.
yes.
Portman.
Interesting. Instead of
Mr.
I,
Portman,
but
aye.
okay.
Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, aye. Mr. Heller. Mr. Heller, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Cassidy.
Ready?
Cassidy, aye. Mr. Wyden. Miss Stabenow. Miss Cantwell.
Who are these people?
Mr. Nelson.
Where are the eyes?
Mr. Menendez.
Where are the nose?
Mr. Carper. Mr. Card.
Well, they're not here.
Mr. Brown.
They're boycotting the committee hearing.
Bennett.
These are the Democrats.
Mr. Casey. Mr. Warner. Mrs. McCaskill.
So it stands to reason.
Mr. Chairman.
You're not going to get any answers.
Chairman votes aye.
The clerk will announce the vote.
Mr. Chairman, the final tally is 14 ayes, 0 nays.
The ayes have it. The nomination is ordered favorably reported.
Okay. So then they go ahead and they do the same thing with Price. Now, did you notice what the difference was? You probably did. I hope you did. If I haven't unplugged anything, at this point. You probably did. Yeah, the difference was that this time they called the names of the Democrats who were absent. Why? They knew they were absent. You can see in the video the chairs are empty. They can see very obviously. And of course, the very first thing they did was change the rules temporarily, or suspend the rules temporarily, in order to compensate for the fact that those chairs, all of them, were empty. But then they held the roll call vote on suspending the rules. Whose names weren't called in that roll call vote, the first one? They didn't call the names of any of the Democrats. Now, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't make a difference because obviously the seats were empty. They weren't going to suddenly appear and vote. But still, curiously, on the second roll call, and by the way, just spoiler alert, on the third roll call, and I don't know whether they have any more roll calls after this or not, but on all subsequent roll calls in this video, they do, in fact, call the names of the absent Democrats just to offer them, at least formally, the chance to make themselves appear and run, and maybe they give up. They say this whole thing, they've changed the rules or suspended the rules. We might as well get on record. I want to be on record as opposing them. And the clerk says, fair's fair. I have to call their names and give them the opportunity to cast their vote. Now, if they don't take that opportunity, that's on them. And I'm going to move very quickly so that they don't appear and make themselves, they don't present themselves and make the vote, because we want to make a political point here with this stunt too. But you gotta give them the chance, and I think he realizes that on the second roll call and the third roll call and all subsequent roll calls. But the fact that he doesn't even call the names of the Democrats who are members of the committee the first time troubles me a little bit. It does seem like a formality. Everyone knows that the vote is going to come out the same, 14-0. The tally's not wrong. But imagine if they called the roll on the Senate floor on the nomination of any of these people. But for the sake of argument, they now have the vote on Stephen Mnuchin. And they called only the names of the Republicans. Why, you would say that there was a really serious problem. Well, what do you know? He got approved unanimously. That's really amazing. A 52-0 vote. You would say, wait a minute. And the Democrats on the floor would say, wait a minute. You didn't call my name. Provided they were there, of course. If there weren't any of them there, well, they wouldn't be able to speak up for themselves. But the clerk would nonetheless call their names because they know that's part of what makes the vote legitimate. Part of what makes the vote real following that procedure. Now, they likely forgot in the first instance because those people weren't there. And as you'll notice, the habit is to call the names of the Republicans in order of their rank on the committee, and then to call later. You'll see they call the names of the Democrats in the order of their rank on the committee, and then the chairman is the last one called to vote. And it was the same in the first roll call vote, except he didn't bother calling any of the Democrats. Here's my question. I want to get in touch with Senate staff and senators themselves, particularly those who are members of the Finance Committee for the Democrats, and ask them, what do you think about the rules on this? Is the fact that they didn't call, does it matter to you, either personally or for purposes of the rules, that they didn't even call your name during the roll call? Isn't that roll call incomplete? And because it's the one that suspends the rules and thereby legitimizes the reports, the favorable reports of Mnuchin and Price's nominations to the floor, aren't those likewise invalid? Did they really suspend the rules if they didn't even bother to call the entirety of the roll and get those votes? Remember, they did it on all the other ones. There must be a reason for that. Now, I could see where there might be some sort of technicality where they say, okay, well, for the purposes of this motion, it's not necessary to call the entirety of the roll. We just need to get 2/3 of the membership present to vote. But I don't know. I mean, the membership isn't present on those votes on the report either. It may be that a technicality separates it, but I want to bring this up because I wonder whether a point of order wouldn't lie against the consideration of the Mnuchin and or Price nominations when they're moved on the floor, and say this nomination is being brought up pursuant to the favorable report of the Finance Committee, and I don't believe that there really was a report of the Finance Committee. There was, they did not complete the roll call vote on the question of suspending the rules, so the rules clearly must still be in operation, and if the rules are still in operation, there wasn't a quorum present, and if there wasn't a quorum present, then this report can't have been validly issued. Now, it will only take the Finance Committee, if they're right, if that point of order lies against the consideration, and the parliamentarian likely would tell the chair, well, you're going to have to do that. Now, you might be able to have some member of the Senate appeal the ruling of the chair with respect to the point of order against considering these two nominations. But then you'll have a floor fight over a nuclear option as opposed to a committee fight over a nuclear option. Though that'll be pretty revealing. Maybe it's a good test case to let us know whether they would be, although I'm sure they don't consider this to be the nuclear option because it doesn't have anything to do with a filibuster. And most people won't notice the similarity, that it's identical in every respect to the parliamentary maneuvering that the nuclear option involves. But okay, so whatever. And again, the Finance Committee could fix this if the point of order were to lie and they were not to decide not to appeal the ruling of the chair with respect to the point of order, just to try and maintain decorum for one more day. You would perhaps send it back to the Finance Committee and say, do this again. After all, it only takes 3 minutes. They would go back in, they would do the same procedure again, and instead of not calling the Democrats, they would call the Democrats this time. And the Democrats might even show up to vote no this time, since the rules are going to be suspended anyway. But they would have to go back and do it. And then there's the additional operation of this rule. They'd turn around in 5 minutes and they'd send it back to the floor. Ordinarily, though, there is a rule, which again, they could vote to suspend if they wanted to. A willful majority could vote to suspend the rule that ordinarily prevents the Senate from considering for final approval the nomination of anyone reported that same day. In other words, it could burn another day off the calendar. And I know it's only one day, but at this stage, honestly, every vote counts. Every half an hour, every 15 minutes that you can burn off of the Senate floor agenda counts. It's cumulative. The time never comes back. I don't care if I burn the whole year 15 minutes at a time or a day at a time or a week at a time, just so long as the whole thing's burned. So I would love to see somebody make a point of order against these nominations when McConnell makes the motion that they be taken up. I'd love to see how they would deal with that. And I'd love to see a really good parliamentarian have that fight. It may be that they just end up, forcing it through and waiving it by a vote of 52 to 48. But I don't know if it's necessarily even that simple. It might, it may yet be that somewhere I forget about the point of order rules, and there are certain points of order which can only be the ruling of the chair on which can only be overturned by a supermajority. Usually a 60-vote one, but occasionally a 2/3 one still lies elsewhere in the rules. So I would love to see somebody bring that one up and challenge it, just to embarrass them and make them go back and do it right and burn another day. And if you burn a day on a Thursday, well, honestly, if they had to send this thing back, if they had an intention of bringing this up today, and they don't, so I'm not sure when they intend to bring up the Mnuchin nomination and the Price nomination, but let's say next week, and let's say next week on Wednesday or Thursday, or they do it on a Wednesday, right? Bring that up, bring up that point of order, then they have to send it back angrily, and they fix it, say that day, that Wednesday, and they report it back, and then they try to bring it back up again, and you say, oh no, that nomination has to lie over for a day, and then that means you got to come back on Thursday. Now, they may already have Thursday scheduled out. Add things to the schedule on Thursday and people's flights home start getting screwed up, and the rest of their weekend schedule starts getting screwed up. And they may just say, all right, you know what? Fine. Monday, we'll take up this Mnuchin thing. And then you've burned, an additional day. They weren't in session, but you got through Saturday and Sunday without anything terrible happening too. Every day counts. Every 15 minutes vote counts. As a matter of fact, yesterday, I enjoyed watching, and I don't know whether we have anything in pocket on this one, but I do think that Daily Kos reported on it at some point. Joan and I chatted about it a little bit on Twitter, but yesterday the Democratic senators were strategically objecting to the right kind of unanimous consent requests on the floor, which made for some very tedious times yesterday. After the consideration of, who did they deal with yesterday? I can't even remember anymore. Let me bring up the schedule. Also, maybe the floor schedule will tell me a little bit about, who's up today. Let's see. Today, yes. Today they have the Congressional Review Act bills that came over from the House, both, odious, but it was, yes, Rex Tillerson, whose nomination was considered yesterday. And look at what they had to do. So they confirmed Tillerson, what was it, like 2:30, 3 o'clock, when they finally got around to that vote. Then, ordinarily, when they're considering nominations like this, and they do so under a unanimous consent agreement, as to time in particular. But this one, they did not have a unanimous consent agreement scheduling it. This was a nomination that technically, I guess you could say, was filibustered. It was, cloture was invoked. So it was the cloture motion that controlled the timing of the vote. I believe it was at 2:30 p.m. yesterday. That time expired on the post-cloture 30 hours. Then they held their vote. Now, there are some procedural votes that have to happen afterwards. For every nomination, for every bill or any consideration, of course, that they have, you can always move to reconsider the vote. And you might recall that the rule is if a senator votes with the prevailing side, whether yay or nay, on any given question, a senator voting with the prevailing side can move to reconsider the vote. There's usually no reason to reconsider the vote, and often the motion to reconsider the vote will then be defeated and the vote won't be reconsidered, but okay, it's out there. With respect to nominations, only one motion to reconsider a vote on nominations is permissible under the current rules of the Senate. So, because they very rarely actually do reconsider such votes, we very rarely will see something like this, but it exists out there. And so what McConnell then has to do is say, I move to table the motion to reconsider the vote on the Tillerson nomination. In other words, if I can dispense with any motion to reconsider, one being made and then tabled, then no more motions to reconsider exist for the minority to try to exploit at this time or any other. In other words, to completely dispense with the nomination and make it final, such that it's ready to send to the president to notify him of the Senate's action so that Tillerson can be sworn in. We have to eliminate the possibility that the vote will be reconsidered at any point in the future by moving to make that reconsideration and then table it, and tabling it kills it. Now, when you have a unanimous consent request for scheduling such a vote, as they had for the previous three, I think, nominations that were out there, part of the unanimous consent request, if you ever watch it being made, is, well, it goes something like this. They'll say, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate vote on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. on the nomination of, let's say, Judge Judy to the Supreme Court, right? Okay, whatever it might be. And but there's also another part to it. They say, further, that upon agreement that the motion to reconsider be considered made and tabled, and that the president thereafter be immediately notified of the approval of the nomination, or something like that. That's the wording of it. In other words, they take care of making and tabling the motion to reconsider all inside the same unanimous consent request that sets the schedule. We want it to be at 2:30, and if the nomination be approved, that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table. That's part of the unanimous consent request. And if the consent request goes through and the scheduling is made, then they get rid of the annoying problem of having to make and table and vote to table the motion to reconsider. But because cloture was invoked here, and that's what set the schedule instead of a unanimous consent request, that little bit of ministerial stuff, and it mostly is these days, just ministerial, because if you have the majority, you'll always table the motion to reconsider the vote. That's often taken care of. But here, it wasn't, so they actually had to go through the exercise. So, 2:30, time runs out. They hold the vote on Rex Tillerson, who, by the way, breaks the record for most on-the-record votes against for a Secretary of State, as I understand it. I think Henry Kissinger had the toughest time of it, and he got something like 10 to 15 votes against. Rex Tillerson nets 43 votes against. Which of course means that yes, a couple of Democrats voted yes on his confirmation. Anyway, the very next thing that happened was we had to have a motion to table the motion to reconsider the vote on confirmation of the Tillerson nomination, which was likewise agreed to by a vote of 55-43. Some senator who had voted to approve of the Tillerson nomination didn't, I guess, probably show for that vote for whatever reason. And then, at that point, so there's another, that was a half hour burnt. That you can have a minimum of 15 minutes on a vote. But this one they spent half an hour voting on should we table the motion to reconsider the vote, because senators are slow and they allow each other to vote really slowly. It takes twice as much time as it has to do it. Now, then they ran into a particular interesting snag. They actually had to, for calendar purposes, approve the journal of each day. It's not the same thing exactly as the congressional record, but they are required constitutionally to keep the journal, not necessarily the record, which is a much more basic, bare bones record of what they did. We voted on this and this was the outcome, as opposed to the recording of every single word that's said on the floor. That's the job of the congressional record, not mandated by the Constitution. The journal, what we did and how we voted and what the total was and what the result was, required by the Constitution. But considering the Tillerson nomination, that's executive business. That takes place in executive session of the United States Senate. Approving the journal, well, that's legislative business, and that has to be taken care of in legislative session of the Senate. Same people, same floor, but two different functions. All right, fine. We have to be in legislative session. Fine, we'll go to legislative session. Oh, no, you don't just say go to legislative session. You got to make a motion to go to legislative session. Yeah, because you know what that means. It's non-debatable. You can't filibuster the motion to move to legislative session, but you got to burn that half an hour to have everybody vote. Why half an hour? Everybody's already here. They just voted. Yeah, well, they like to take their sweet time. Could have been an hour. There's no recent practice, I don't think, to lean on about closing a vote before everyone has voted when they're just lingering around making things last too long. But a half hour is well within tolerances, so what the hell? Burn it. Motion to proceed to legislative session. Agreed to by a vote of 53-44. The next question. Okay, so we made it to legislative session, right? Because constitutionally we have to come back and make sure we approve the journal of the previous day's proceedings, et cetera, et cetera. Periodically we got to take care of this business. So let's approve the journal. Everybody, no, you don't just do that. It's got to be a motion to approve the journal. Why? Everybody knows we're going to approve it by a bare majority vote. It's 52-48 Senate. Them's the rules. You don't do anything without a vote in this body. Fine. Shall the journal stand approved to date? Well, it was agreed to by a vote of 54-44. which is interesting. Where is everybody else? I don't know. They didn't consider the vote important enough, I guess, to show up. 54 means that at least 2 Democrats and or independents, and I see Angus King has been voting pretty much with Republicans on these things, but a Democrat, too, somewhere had to say, yeah, I approve the journal. Who cares, right? I mean, the journal is a journal. No harm done in voting to approve the journal. Kind of a freebie vote. It's also considered something of a leadership vote, like, obviously all the, and a vote on, as we sometimes find in the House on things like this. It's basically used to sort of take attendance, but everybody knew who was there. Anyway, somebody voted to approve the journal. No skin off my nose, but whatever. Okay. But that's not the end of the business for the day. We also, of course, have to take care of, we got to get the nomination of Betsy DeVos started. That's apparently the next one up. They were thinking, by the way, according to some reports, of going to Jeff Sessions next because it's extraordinarily important that the Attorney General be in place because law enforcement and international intrigue and all that kind of stuff. And ordinarily it's true. But Jeff Sessions is, of course, total disaster. But they decided to move DeVos up. We got to have a Secretary of Education vote before the Attorney General vote because international terrorism in our schools from bears, of course, who are coming armed. These are the bearing of arms that we've been talking about all this time in the Second Amendment, are menacing the schools. So anti-terrorism takes precedence. Gotta confirm the Education Secretary first before the Attorney General. Why in the world would you do that? The answer is they've lost 2 Republican votes on DeVos. They lose another one. There's an actual chance, barring any Democratic or independent defections on this. And does an independent move to the yes column even count as a defection? I guess yes if it's Bernie, not necessarily if it's Angus King. Call your senator, Bill. And anyway, they moved DeVos up because they might need Jeff Sessions to still be a senator when they hold the DeVos vote. It's that close. If they confirm him as Attorney General, there's a vacancy, and there's only 51 Republicans in the Senate. And if they lose 2, then they could lose the vote on DeVos. So guess what? Anti-terrorist considerations require considering the Secretary of Education first. Okay, so fine. They make that decision, right? Fine. Well, nobody really, on the Democratic side, they're united pretty much, according to reports, in opposition to the DeVos nomination. Plus, of course, they have 2 Republicans. So it might be possible to defeat her. So obviously, with so much opposition to her, when I ask unanimous consent that we move to the consideration of her nomination, someone will object. I'll have to make a motion to proceed to that nomination. And we'll have to have a vote, right? Right, yeah, okay. So we might as well get this started. And those guys, they'll filibuster. Now, granted, it only takes 51 votes, or a majority of those, I guess, present and voting to close. I don't know what the new precedent says. Maybe you actually have to have 51 hard votes, or is it just the presence, or the majority of those present? I don't even remember. And you can't look it up either. You'd have to look in Dressler's precedents instead. Deschler's precedents instead of the rules because it's not in there, which brings me to another point later, perhaps. Anyway, there would be a filibuster and you would need a majority vote to do it, and it's not entirely clear that we would get a majority vote. So we're going to have to start anyway by invoking cloture on an executive nomination. Right, yes. Why did you say that? Oh, God, we're still in legislative session. We came back to legislative session to approve the stupid goddamn journal. All right. Got to go back to executive session. That requires a motion. Yes, I know. Move to proceed back to executive session where we were an hour ago to consider the nomination of Elizabeth DeVos to be Secretary of Education. Got to burn a half an hour voting on that one. It was agreed to, 52-47. And then, of course, you had to file the cloture petition and start the clock running, which, of course, means full cloture petition filed yesterday, Wednesday, has to lay over the entirety of today, calendar Thursday, and then 1 hour into the session, if held on Friday, it would be eligible for a vote on cloture on DeVos. Following that, the 30-hour clock runs, and depending on what they decide to do for the weekend, either come back on Monday and vote on DeVos, or stay in all weekend and vote on DeVos early in the morning Sunday, which I don't know if they're really willing to do. But by the way, after they fixed that, they decided, all right, we have to wait now. We don't have anybody else ready. We have to wait for this cloture motion to ripen. We might as well go and handle those things that the House just sent us. The Congressional Review Act resolutions or bills. Yeah, it's a resolution. HJ Res 38 on the pollution of streams in proximity to coal mines. You would likely have heard about the substance of this CRA thing. And by the way, remember that the Congressional Review Act is likewise by law protected from filibuster, much the same way that reconciliation bills are. So that's why we didn't see cloture motions, etc., and filibusters and more votes on that one. But they do have to try and get that done while they're waiting for the cloture vote on DeVos to ripen. So let's pick up that particular piece of legislation. And, oh, God, legislation. We have to go back to legislative session. This was poorly planned. I really feel like we wasted a lot of time on this one. I move that we return to legislative session. Just a minute. We're going to have a vote. Burn half an hour on that one. Motion to proceed to legislative session agreed to, 5542. All right, fine. Here we are in legislative session. We can finally talk about HJ Res 38. That stupid coal pollution rule can finally be repealed. Okay, let's talk about that one. Wait a minute. We don't talk about it just because you say you want to talk about it. You want to proceed to consideration of that bill? You're going to have to make a motion to proceed to consideration of HJ Res 38. And we're going to have to vote. And that vote is going to take a half hour. Do you see how this game can be played? They voted on Tillerson just as expected. Then they had to vote on the motion to table the motion to reconsider the vote on the confirmation. That took them a half hour or more to vote on that. Then they had to vote on the motion to proceed to legislative session. That took them a half an hour. Then they had to vote on whether or not to approve the journal. That took them a half an hour. Then they had to make a motion to proceed back to executive session to file the cloture petition on DeVos. That took them a half an hour. Then they had to make a motion to proceed back to legislative session so they could get to the bill that had just come over from the House. That took them a half hour. And then they had to make a motion to proceed to consideration of that bill. That took them a half hour. Then they considered the damn bill. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 half-hour votes, 3 hours of floor time just to move back and forth between executive session and legislative session and dispense with the paperwork after the approval of Rex Tillerson. And finally, so 3 hours burned between Tillerson and taking up the question of what to do with HJ Res 38. And they went on and burned whatever debate time they had and voted on it and passed it, etc. It didn't take them a great deal of time. And they also took care of some other legislative business while they were there, some non-controversial stuff, and began the Rule 14 process, by the way, for S-274, the Feinstein bill, which I think is the request or the demand of the repeal of the executive order with respect to the immigration rules. So that's interesting. Rule 14 would mean it would come directly to the floor rather than being stalled in committee at some point or being referred to committee. So that is interesting and something to keep an eye on too. But I just wanted to give you that sort of procedural lesson. An hour at a time, a half hour at a time, it doesn't matter. The more of this day you burn, the later the session goes, the more likely they are to push business they thought they could take care of around, let's say 4:30, 5 o'clock, now becomes 8 o'clock, and people are getting antsy. If you're the president, you're practically passing out on the phone with the prime minister, and you decide instead, push it to tomorrow. But tomorrow's Thursday. That pushes another item that you thought you would get done Thursday afternoon into either Thursday night or Friday, and we don't want Thursday night sessions. We don't want Friday sessions. We want to be gone Thursday afternoon. that carries it over into Monday, and it has a chain reaction and pushes things down there, and do it over and over and over and over again. Why not? Why not? Do it with everything. So I thought that was interesting to watch, and I'm glad that we got a chance to talk a little bit about that. The schedule, by the way, for today, Thursday, look at this. They still haven't finished with HJ Res 38. There are 6 hours of debate under the, I don't know whether it was a unanimous consent request that set that, or I can't remember offhand how much time the Congressional Review Act allows for debate in the Senate, but it may be that 6 hours. But you can bet your boots, I guess, we'll say it that way, old-fashioned way, that they didn't want to begin or at least run the clock on a whole lot of that 6 hours last night. So maybe they took care of an hour or two, I'm not sure, last night, but I don't think so. I think that they pushed it over to today, and it's going to eat up the bulk of the day. Let's see. As a reminder, we're told McConnell filed cloture on the DeVos nomination. Under the rules, Thursday will be that intervening day. The cloture motion on DeVos will ripen as early as 1 hour after the Senate convenes on Friday. If cloture is invoked, then we'll have the 30 hours after that, and there could be action on additional Congressional Review Act resolutions during the 30-hour clock, probably, that runs there. Although they shouldn't concede to running the clock in the background, they ought to simply say 30 hours of debate on DeVos has to be actual debate. That option will be open to them. I had something else in mind, I think, when I was talking about the movement back and forth between legislative and executive sessions. We are instead out of time, but I don't know. I always have a good time examining these things and just explaining the intricacies of how this stuff works, just to explain the importance of burning 10, 15 minutes, burning half an hour. Anytime you have a vote, that's likely to burn up to half an hour. I still think that when they get messages from the president, at this point, with this president, I don't know whether you shouldn't just say, you know what, I'd like to have a vote on whether or not we accept this message. I don't even know if that's possible under the rules, but I'd love to have a vote on the ruling of the chair. Let the chair say, no, under the rules, we don't vote on these things. Well, I appeal the ruling of the chair. Well, you're going to get crushed, or at least lose 52-48. I don't care. Half an hour. Let's do it. I say that's the way we ought to make things work in the Senate, at least for the time being, and ask for those votes. And for that matter, every time that they say that cloture can be invoked by a simple majority, I'd say appeal the ruling of the chair. Yes, there's a precedent that says that that's the case. I'm aware of that. So what? I want the chair to rule, and I want to appeal the ruling of the chair, and I want to burn a half an hour losing that vote. And I'm going to do it to you every single time. Why? 'Cause I can. Now, speaking of other things we can do, you can and should. Stay tuned for the after show coming up next. It is, of course, Thursday, and that means it's the Thank God It's Jovadi episode of the show, and I love to say that. Trump orders Homeland Security to spend less time scrutinizing white supremacists and other groups without a Muslim connection. Love to hear more about that one. A Trump voter is stunned to find her Syrian relatives deported, gee whiz, and advising staff to expect physical threats. Reuters orders its reporters to cover Trump like any authoritarian regime, like you might see perhaps overseas. What about the last half? They'll be reporting that the Republican bill to privatize public lands gets yanked. I'm glad to see that. After an extremely large and immediate public outcry. Keep the outcry up, ladies and gentlemen. And the White House issues press credentials to InfoWars, old-school fake news swift boat birther provocateur Jerome Corsi. I'm not kidding, Jerome Corsi.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
And that I'm not kidding, Jerome Corsi comes directly from Justice. He's not kidding. You should stay tuned, of course, for the after show coming up next. Wink and Justice will bring you that and much more. All the things we missed today. Do keep up that public pressure. I can't credit the Women's March enough. This would never have happened without their motion last weekend.